app lifecycle, view controller lifecycle, and we're also talking about UI controls. We've used UI button quite a bit, but we'll also see using UI stepper, UI slider, UI segmented control, and UI switch, right? That's what we'll be doing today. So we'll go ahead and create a new Xcode project. It's a single view application. For the product name, it's going to be app cycle for now. And we're also looking at UI controls. Let's just call it app lifecycle. App lifecycle UI controls. Team, organization name, ID, language is Swift, storyboards, core data is unchecked, unit test is unchecked. Click on next. Here, if you want to save your project via creating a get in Xcode, make sure you're not putting it in an existing file that has a get already. This is the step if you want to have your code pushed to GitHub via Xcode, which we'll do again in this lesson. It cannot be in an existing project that has a get already, right? So for mine, I'll just simply put it on the desktop, and I'm not creating a get repository. I am not in a folder that has a get repository already, okay? You could go ahead and put your project in a folder that has a get repository already, but you can't push it from Xcode anymore. You have to go through terminal. You have to navigate to that particular project to push it to GitHub, okay? All right, so now I'll click on create. We have our project, we have our view controller. It's a scaffold app like we always have. Okay, cool. So let's start talking about the life cycle of a view controller. So let's all navigate to the view controller code. Let's all go to the view controller code. And let's start talking about the life cycle of a view controller. When your view comes on screen, what functions get called? In what order do they get called? So here we have our view did load, which we've had many times. So here for the view did load, I'll put in number 1. That's the first thing that gets called on screen. It comes on screen. There you could have your setup action. In your view did load, that's where you want to have any startup configuration for your application. I want to change the background color. I want to start my blackjack game. Anything you want to start, you start it in the view did load. So here I'll simply put a print statement to see the order in which those functions get printed. And for here, as we did with the text field delegate, I will simply copy the name of the function. I'll simply copy the name of the function, and I'll put in view did load. The reason for that, we want to see in which order it gets called when we run our application. Okay? And again, view did load gets called once. It gets called once. When your application comes on screen, that's it. That's the one time it gets called. So it gets called once. It gets called when the app first launches or that view comes on screen, that view controller. When that view controller view is presented to the user. So when I see that white screen come up, view did load gets called. So at this point, we could run our application. So select your iPhone 11 Pro Max. Go ahead and run your application. And let's see what happens. Right? So my app comes on screen. We haven't gotten any elements on our view yet. View did load got called. Everybody has their view did load. Did it get printed? Right? So again, that gets called once. My view comes on screen, view did load gets called. That's why I want to do any setup, any configurations. If you have a game or if you have some instance you have to create, your tic-tac-toe, right? You have some confetti you want to show the user, that's where you do it, in view did load, right? The user doesn't want to see confetti every time they go back to that screen, right? That would be a bit, right, too much there, right? Or a welcome screen, whatever you want to do, set up in view did load. In all the functions that we override in, we call super. Super is needed here for the super view to do whatever it needs to do. Whatever setup that super view needs to do, we need to explicitly say super view did load. So the parent view of the UI view control itself, whatever setup logic it needs to do, that's why we call super view did load. On every view override we do today, we'll be explicitly saying super dot whatever function it is. Right? Awesome. So next up, we'll go ahead and we'll print out view will appear. So view will appear. Again, view will appear will get called every time that view comes on screen. View did load gets called once. View will appear gets called every time you navigate away from a view, you come back to the view, view will appear gets called. So view will appear gets called every time the view is presented. We'll see today, we'll see exactly how that works, right? So you have view A, which we have here. You go to view B, you come back to view A, view will appear gets called. You go back to view B, you come back to view A, view will appear gets called. If you go to view B and you come back to view A, does view did load get called? No, right? As Tanya is saying, and Adan is shaking his head one way or the other. I don't know if it's yes or no. No. Okay, very cool. So view did load doesn't get called because view did load got called on the initial setup. Everybody? Right? So I navigate to view B, I come back to view A, view will appear gets called, but view did load does not get called. Okay? So if you want to do, again, some configuration when the user comes back to that view, maybe you want to update some score or whatever it is, that's where you do it, in view will appear. Okay? So view will appear is step 2, gets called in order 2 here. We could put a print statement here. Make sure to call super, view will appear. And for animated by, we're just passing through because we wanted to have some transition, a nice smooth transition by default. So we're passing through here. And we'll put in a print statement. So I'll simply copy the name of the function and put in print. View will appear. Great. There's also a view did appear. So view will appear gets called, the view will appear. It will. I will close that door. There's a next function called view did appear. Super.view did appear. Again, passing through here for the animation. I'll print and I'll simply copy my view did appear function name and this is 3. Let's launch our app again and see what happens. So here, let's see the order of this. So if we all have our print statements, so view did load got called, view will appear got called, and when the view actually was on screen, view did appear got called. The view did appear. You probably want to do some extra animation there. So view will appear, maybe you want to start an animation. View did appear, you probably want to finish or fade out that animation. We'll talk about more animations in Unit 4, right? But those functions gives us the ability to add logic where we want that logic to be. Let's take a step back and talk about what happens, what's the first thing that gets called when an app actually launches. So for that, we'll go back to the app delegate. So click on the app delegate. In the app delegate, again, the app delegate is a delegate. It's a protocol. The app delegate is a protocol. What is it doing? It's listening for changes from that application. Did the application go in the background? In that case, pre-iOS 13, everything was in the app delegate. Did the application go in the background? Is it in the foreground? Did they use a kill the app? Right? Everything was in the app delegate. As of iOS 13, Xcode 11, Apple took out logic or delegate methods from the app delegate, and it's now in the scene delegate. We'll talk about the scene delegate after, but for now, the app delegate is the first delegate that gets called. In that particular function here, the first function we see there did finish launching with options. If you're doing programmatic UI, pre-iOS 13, if you're doing programmatic UI, that's where you set it up. That's where you set up your view controller logic or whatever it is. In iOS 13, you do it in the scene delegate. Right? So here, we'll put a print statement here, and we'll copy did finish launching with options. We'll paste it in here, and I'll simply write app delegate hyphen to see which one gets called in which order. Again, we'll revisit more of those functions as we do more coding, but it's good to know now how your app, in what cycle, what happens when your app, when you go from not launch to launch. And again, the app delegate is a protocol. We've seen protocols before. We're getting to know more and more what protocols are useful for. So this is a protocol. It's using the delegation pattern with methods on it. And our application makes use of those methods and listens for changes on our application. In that case, that particular method, again, the method is not called explicitly by anybody. There's no place where we're saying did finish launching, open parents, right? But the function gets called when the application launches by the application lifecycle. So here we have app delegate. Let's go ahead and run our application, run the app, and let's see in which order this happens. So here the app delegate got called before view did load. Everybody? Again, this is the entry point of your application cycle. It goes to the app delegate first. When we talk about frameworks and we bring in third-party frameworks, like Google's frameworks or Firebase frameworks, also Google's frameworks, such a big company. Right, so as we bring in third-party frameworks into our code, there will be some configurations we have to do. This is one of the places we could configure Firebase or whatever it is, that framework, that third-party framework. There's some setup logic it needs to do. We're not going to do it in view did load. That's too late. We'll do it in the application delegate or the scene delegate. That's before your app actually comes on screen. Everybody with me? It's seconds. It's splits of a second, right? It's fast, but you don't want to do configuration logic in view did load. That's too late. You want to have it in your app delegate, okay? As Apple says here, override point for customization after application launch. right? Good place to customize and have configurations, right? So let's go to the scene delegate. Click on the scene delegate, which is right below the app delegate here. And again, we see this window property. We'll come to it when we talk about programmatic UI, right? But every application has a window. We'll talk more about that. In our scene delegate, let's copy connection options here, or will connect to, actually. Copy will connect to, and let's paste, let's put in a print statement. Put a print statement right above the guard statement in the scene delegate. And right before will connect to, we could say scene delegate. And again, scene delegate is new to iOS 13. Because an application on iPad could have multiple windows, right? So we have a scene delegate, we could have multiple scenes. Let's launch our app again and see what happens. So in our console, we have app delegate, got launched, right? Then we went to the scene delegate to do any setup UI we want to do as far as like view controllers, if we're doing it programmatically, that's where we do it in the scene delegate. After the scene delegate gets called, we go to our view controller. View did load. View did load got called. So far so good? So we saw the order of it, right? So we went app delegate to scene delegate to view controller. Every app has an initial view controller. So this is our initial view controller. The view did load got called. Okay? I think I'll stop here talking about app cycles. But other things we could see in the scene delegate, the application did become active. That means it's on screen. It will resign. That means the user got rid of that app, right? They swiped up. Will enter foreground. The app is about to come on screen. Did enter background. Again, you dismiss the app. It's in the background, right? So those are places, especially when you start doing user activity and user data, places to save data. What if your app crashes? You probably want to save the data before the user loses the data. Those are the places to put them. Cool? Again, we'll come back to those as we go through curriculum. Let's go back to our view controller. We're on step 3. We have view did appear. Yes?
So, when we do this, view will appear and view did appear. I'm not quite understanding.
Okay, so view will appear. It hasn't gone on screen yet. It's about to appear. So you might want to set up something. Like you might want to call your table view. Like as we go more into app development, we'll see more use cases for it. Your view is about to come on screen, not view did load. You have one opportunity in view did load, right? What if you navigate away, you come back, you're about to come back on screen? You probably want to set up your UI, right? Based on some data that the user changed, right? The user changed their age from 40 to 41. So when you come back, when the view is about to appear, you want to show the user what they just edited. So that's where you put it. Will appear. Will come on screen. Will appear, not appear. No. View will appear. The view will come on screen. No matter what, it's about to come on screen. I'm about to open the door, right? I'm thinking, should I say hello or no, or not, right? To the person that I'm seeing.
So will appear not necessarily actually you will see on screen.
You will, definitely you will.
So what the difference will appear to did appear?
Did appear, it's actually on screen now. So it's a transition. The transition is I'm about to walk to the door. I'm actually outside the door. That's the similarities. I'm not outside the door yet with the view will appear. I'm about to get to the door. And did appear, I actually got out of the door. Right? So view will appear, the view is about to come on screen. The user is about to see the view. View did appear, the user is actually seeing the view now. Right? View did appear, the user is actually seeing it.
So why will appear before
Where are we here? Will appear is first. In the console here, do you see the console? The message? Because it's not on screen yet. It will.
But if did appear already on screen, why
Did appear is not on screen yet. Did load. Those are different. There's did load. Did appear is after will, right? Because will is not there yet, right? I will go to the market. I'm not there yet. I will. The keyword will, right?
No, I understand the keyword, but I don't understand, like, so the keyword here is that mean, so it's will be equal later to did appear or not necessarily?
If the app crashes, it's not going to be did appear, for example, right? The app could crash and did appear doesn't happen, right? But will appear is a good place to start configuring your UI because you don't want to configure the UI, right? When I say configure the UI, you don't want to change the UI when the view is on screen already. Like imagine you have an app, right? And you load your app up. It takes whatever, 15 seconds or whatever, like a couple seconds before you actually see the weather, right? Isn't it better UI before you actually see that screen that the weather is already updated on the UI and the minute the view comes up, you see the weather? That's better UI, correct? Imagine it appears first, then you have to wait for some seconds, and then the UI updates, right? Which happens with a network, don't get me wrong, right? But that's the logic there. So if you want to do some UI update, you want to do it in view will appear, not when the view appeared already, right? Like if you're making lunch or breakfast or dinner, you want to make it before the guest comes, right? Not when the guest did appear, right? My guests will appear, I'm getting ready, I'm making them lasagna, whatever. Did appear, it's done, it's done. The table is ready. Cool? All right. Any other questions before we move on? Good question there, clarification. But no matter how much theory we talk about now, it will become more useful as we use that, right? As we use it, as we update in our UI, we'll know why view will appear is the better place to put it, as opposed to view did appear. View did appear is too late, right? There's a lag there. The user sees that, the user is waiting, then the UI comes up. That's too late. You want to set it up in view will appear, so the minute the view comes on screen, UI is ready. Cool? All right, let's go to the next one. So view, this is 4 here. View will disappear. Super view will disappear. Passing through here. Okay, again, Julia, the view will disappear. It will go away, right? I could, again, set up some logic there. It will go away. And we also have a next method, the view did disappear, okay? Some of those are used more than often than others. Like heavily used is view will appear. View will appear is heavily used. And view will disappear as well is also heavily used. Like maybe I want to hide some UI as my view is going off screen. That's a place to put it. So view will disappear here. We could copy that and put it in a print statement. And lastly, there's more, but that's like the basic top ones that you need to know. And here we have view did disappear, super view did disappear. Passing through here, get a print statement. And here I'll copy view did disappear. We won't be able to test view will disappear, view did disappear, right? Because we need a next view. Does that make sense? Like I need to go away from view A to view B in order for those methods to get called. Does that make sense? All right, so we'll keep those because we have more stuff to do and talk about today. So for now, we have those 5 functions. If we go back to the lesson, we have a view lifecycle chart here, like what happens, right, when the view is disappearing. We have brief statements on what view did load is, right, called when the view controller content view is created and loaded from storyboard. We talk about what view will appear does, right? So there's more there, but again, no matter how much you read, understanding comes more when you actually code out UI, which will happen throughout the curriculum. We'll be using those view methods there throughout curriculum. So that's just an introduction of what they do at a high level. Great. So now let's go to our storyboard. Let's go set up our UI. In our storyboard, we'll have, let's go to storyboard. Everybody finished writing those methods out. We'll come back to them later to test them out with the disappear methods. So go to our storyboard. It's blank now. So far, we haven't connected one storyboard or one scene to a next scene. Today, we'll connect one scene to a next scene. And we'll also embed. We've used the embed tool. We use the embed tool to embed a stack or to embed views in a stack view, correct? So today, we'll use the embed button again to embed this view controller inside of what's known as a navigation controller. So we'll embed this view controller inside a navigation controller. What is a navigation controller? We'll talk more about navigation controller, but for today, a navigation controller is a container view, right? A container view, basically, it has children, right? Everybody? A UI stack view is a container view. A navigation controller is a container view of controllers. Its children are controllers. A navigation could have many children. A navigation view could have many children. Our navigation view, its child will be this view controller, right? So we'll embed it. It will also give us access to the navigation bar. In our iOS app, if we go to settings on our app, for people who have iOS phones, if we go to settings here, everybody has an iPhone, go to settings. Your neighbor should be able to see your settings. So go to settings. Go to settings. At the top, do we see a settings label? This is known as the navigation bar, right? It lets the user know what the application is. So today, we'll make use to that. We'll have a navigation controller. We'll embed our view controller inside of a navigation controller, and we'll change the navigation title. Cool? All right, so let's do that. Click on your view controller. Make sure you click on your view controller. The embed button, click on embed button at the bottom here. Let me go down here. So do we see where the embed button is? Click on embed button. Do we see navigation controller? Click on the navigation controller. And now we've embedded successfully our view controller inside of a navigation controller. Again, the navigation controller is a container. Itself doesn't hold logic, but it points to a view controller. It has a root view controller. In that particular instance, the root view controller, or the first view controller, is our view controller. We'll talk more about this as we keep talking next week. But for now, this is an introduction to navigation controller. Embed, the same way you embedded a UI stack view. Click on your view controller and click on the embed in, and you'll see navigation controller. Did you see that, Tiffany? We embedded a stack view in. We did it both ways. We did it both ways. I see nods, so we did it both ways. I'm not that cuckoo. Sometimes I am. All right, cool. We all got our navigation controller, correct? We all got our navigation controller? All of a sudden, you got glasses on. You're in the factory. All right. All right, cool. So I said we could give it a title. Click on the bar on our view controller. We have a bar now. We have a navigation bar now. Click on the bar. Do we click on the bar? Do we see the attribute inspector? In the attribute inspector, do we see a title? Is your inspector window open? Do we see a title there? So in the title, we could give it a title. We'll call it App Cycle and UI Controls. Yeah, restart always works. All right, so here we have title, we have Upcycle, and we have UIControls. You press enter, it comes up in your navigation bar. Right, so here we change the navigation bar title. Cool. Run your app. Let's verify our bar does appear. Julia, that's for you. Everybody has the navigation bar title showing. All right, great. Our app starts to look like the settings app. In iOS 12 or 11, can't remember, Apple introduced a large title modifier or a large title option. So we could make our first navigation title large, look larger, look more appealing to the user of a starting point. So if you click on your navigation controller, click on the navigation controller, go to the identity inspector. No, not the identity inspector. Could never see that sometimes. 1 second. Okay, sorry. Click on the bar of the navigation controller. And make sure our attributes inspector is open. Do we see prefers large titles? Let me zoom in here. Do we see prefers large titles? You could select that. And now you have larger titles, right? Again, it looks more modern, it looks nicer, right? So that got introduced like 2 iOSs ago. Cool. All right. Cool. All the things you could mess around with, like the bar tint. Well, not the bar tint here. Let's not mess around with that for now. All right. Let's zoom back out here. Let's run the app and make sure this is correct. As we see with more view controllers, you do not want to have all your bars using the large title. So we'll see in code how we could change that. We could say always show. We could say automatically show. For a particular view controller, we could say do not show a large title. So as of next week, we'll start seeing how we could do that in code. Great. So our UI is starting to come together here. Today, we'll also segue from one view controller to a next view controller. What does that mean? When I click on an item or UI element for our use case today, we'll click on a button. When I click on my button, it will take me over to a next view. Mel, how are you doing so far? Good. So when I click on a button, which will add, it will take me to a next view. So this is segueing. You segue from view A to view B. Let me zoom in here. All right. So drag in a next view controller. So drag in a next view controller. Search for view controller. Drag in a view controller here. On our root view, we're calling this, where we have Upcycle here, we're calling this the root view controller. Root meaning the first. Bless you. Root meaning the first. We're calling the view controller that has the Upcycle title on it the root view controller. So click on your root view controller and drag in a UI button. Drag in a UI button and center it. Center it with the scene. So center it here. Right? And for the button title, I will edit it and I'll call it Show Controls. And I'll set the constraints. I'll set the constraints using align. So I'll click on my button, make sure my button is selected. I'll go to the align button. And I'll click on horizontal and vertical. That should be enough there. Great. We don't need a width and a height because we have text in there. So at this point, it has an intrinsic size. Everybody? It has an intrinsic size. We do not need to set width and height. Intrinsic size, meaning the contents of that label or that button, it knows its size. It knows its size. We do not need to give it a width. Everybody? We could give it a width if we want to make it longer or taller, but for the purposes of what we're doing, we only have a label here, so it knows its width and height. Show controls. Let me zoom in here. It's a button. It's a UI button. We could make it bigger. Go to the font area of our attributes inspector. So go to our attributes inspector. Go to the attributes inspector, and you could change the font size by going up here. You could change the font size. You could change the type of font that you're using. You could make it bold. There's a lot of attributes there you could change. One of the best ways is to just play around with it. Play around with attributes inspector, play around with different fonts, see what's there, play around with colors. Really appreciate and love iOS and Xcode, Mr. Eric, because he loves Xcode. All right, so we have show controls. We'll control drag from show controls. We'll control drag, we love control dragging. We'll control drag from show controls over to the new view controller we added, and we'll release. That's going to create a connection or a segue between show controls and our new view controller. So control drag, control drag from show controls over to our newer view controller. We release, and we get some options. Let me zoom in here. We have some options. You see, we have action segue. A segue, as I said earlier, it enables us to go from point A to point B. A segue is the transition. It creates a transition point between two views. That's what's a segue. We'll do more segues. iOS is all about segueing from one view to the next. So here we'll select show, and it connects the two. It connects the two. We could even inspect. We could inspect everything here by using the inspector. If I click on my segue, it brings up the attributes inspector. Let's go in here. It brings up the attributes inspector, and it shows the segue. Later in curriculum, we'll see that we could have a segue identifier. How do I know which segue I'm using if I have multiple segues? Which one? The segue is the connection between A and B, that transition. As far as like the segue style, that is the kind of segue. Like if you have multiple segues, sorry. You could have multiple segues from one view controller. Right? Right now we have one view controller to one view controller. I could have one view controller going to multiple view controllers. So now I need to distinguish between which segue. Exactly. And then to access that, you have an identifier. The kind of segue we have here is called a push segue. It pushes one view to the next. Right? It pushes. So we have a stack. Picture you have a stack of pancakes that Jimmy made. Jimmy made pancake number 1, right, which is our root view controller. Everybody paying attention with me? Pancake number 1 is the first pancake that Jimmy made. Jimmy made a next pancake. Next pancake goes on top of the first pancake. So that's pushing. Our current view is the root view controller. It will be the bottom pancake, right? Amini comes with her pancake. She puts it on top of the root view controller. Everybody? That means pushing. Amini pushed a new pancake onto the first pancake. So that's called pushing. We see push here where it says push. So that's pushing. That's a push segue. Which one? The segue one? I could just simply delete it and reconnect it. So here I could delete my segue. Do you have the button? Okay, so control drag from the button. Control drag from the button over to the second view controller. So control drag from the button here over to the second view controller and click on show. Cool? All right, the minute we click on show, what happened to our second view controller? We got a back button. Did we see the back button? Everybody saw the back button. We saw the back button again because we're in a navigation controller. It's navigating. We need a way to go back. That's the back button. So we got all that from embedding inside of a navigation controller. Cool? Great. So let's go ahead and run. You can actually run your app and click on the button, and it will segue to the second view controller. Were we able to segue? Are we able to go back? All right, cool. So I segue. Look at that. Look, our view stuff is getting called now. You see that? Julia? View did appear, view will appear, view did disappear. All of those. I know, a lot of views. Cool. So if I go back, what's going to get called? Let me delete my console. If I go back, show of hands, if I go back now to my first view, what method will get called in my view cycle? Chelsea? Will appear and did appear, correct? So let's go ahead and do that. So Chelsea is saying if I navigate back to my first view controller, view will appear and view did appear will get called. Do we see that? Thank you very much, Chelsea. Right? Because here, view will appear gets called before view did appear. The view will appear. It will come on screen. And then view did appear got called afterwards. Everybody saw that? Test it out. So clear your console by clicking on the delete button. Mel? Click on the delete button. Our console is empty, correct? If I go back to my simulator and I click on controls, view will disappear, got called. Then view did disappear, got called. Does that make sense? We see what happened there, right? The view went from A to B. It was about to get off screen, so view will disappear, got called. When it actually left the screen, view did disappear, got called. So far, so good? Yes, sir?
When we press the button to segue to the upper view, it does view will disappear.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, why doesn't it view will appear and we did appear for the new view that we're going to?
The new view you're going to doesn't have any functions. We didn't print out anything there. It doesn't even have a view controller class.
Oh yeah, that was specific.
Very good. So Matt's question was, why don't we have view will appear getting called on our second view? We don't have a class yet. We need to create one. Everybody? Every view controller scene in Storyboard needs to have its own class. We haven't, as of today, created a view controller class. We will today. Anybody knows what type of class we created? Or what, is it a Swift file or? Look at CocoaTouch class. Very good. It's going to be a CocoaTouch class that subclass is from what? UI view controller. Excellent. You guys could go home. All right. Very, 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 very good. All right. So let's go through those motions. We need to create a class now. We need to create a class. So let's go create a new file. I click on my view controller because I want it to be like right around there. I'll click on Command N. It will bring up the new file dialog. My CocoaTouch class has been highlighted because that's the last thing I created. So if it's not highlighted, if yours says Swift file, make sure you select CocoaTouch class. We're about to create a CocoaTouch class. So select CocoaTouch class, click on Next. Where it says class here, I will call it controls view controller. Let me zoom up. So controls view controller is the name of the class. It's subclasses from UI view controller. If you do not have UI view controller here, you could type it out. So I could type out UI view controller. Also create a zib, make sure that's unchecked. We'll talk about zibs later. Language is Swift, and then click on Next. Make sure your targets is checked. Click Create. Cool? So this is what it created. It created us a new class. The class is called Controls View Controller. It inherits from UI View Controller. It comes with view to load because most times you need that no matter what you're doing because you need to set up some sort of logic. It has a navigation, storyboard, segue. We'll talk about that later. For now, delete that commented out code. Yeah. You check the zip. I said do not check it. Yeah. By default, I don't think it's checked to begin with. Oh, uncheck it. Cool. That's fine. It's not going to break for now. All right, so this is what our class looks like. We have a UI view controller here. Override, view to load. Great. So Matt, your question was, why doesn't view will appear get called? So we could write it in here and print or call super view will appear. Passing through and print view will appear. And I could simply say controls or CVC, control view controller, like that. So we know the difference. So now when we segue to that view, it's going to call view will appear. And your print statement will come up. All right, so at this point, actually, we need some more setting up to do. We need to go back to storyboard, and we need to connect our new view controller and make this view controller control that view. And we do it through the identity inspector, right? So we go back to our storyboard, we click on the new view controller, we go to identity inspector, and where it says class UI view controller, we change that to controls view controller, and we press enter. Let's go ahead and do that together. So I click on my storyboard. I click on my second view controller here. Everybody? Right? Everybody? I go to the identity inspector. I go to the identity inspector. Sorry, click on the view controller, identity inspector. Do we see class UI view controller? Do we see class UI view controller? Okay, so right now it's a generic UI view controller. We want the class that we just created to be responsible for that particular view controller. So we need to change the class to our controls view controller. Cool? So let's go ahead and start typing in CON. Controls view controller will come up. And press enter. Press enter. So when you press enter, make sure modules, inherit module comes up. Make sure that's checked. Make sure that's checked. So make sure you press enter on controls view controller. So far, so good? At this point, run your application, and we'll be able to verify if indeed that it's set up correctly. If our view will appear gets called in our CVC, then it's set up correctly. If it's not, then we need to fix it. So now, if I clear my console by clicking on the trash can, I click on Show Controls, view will appear, or CVC, view will appear, it should get called. And it does get called. Right, everybody? Did CVC come up? All right. Cool. Let's go back to our view controller and just give it better names because now we might get confused. So go back to the first view controller. And for the view, you know what? Let's refactor. Let me show you guys how to refactor a view controller. So if you want to change the name of a class, if you want to change the name of a view controller, we do not manually change the name. Everybody, we know what happens there. I want to right-click on where it says view controller here. I want to right-click on it. Go to where it says refactor. Right-click on view controller. where it says class view controller, right click on view controller, go to refactor rename, click on rename, and here we'll simply call this home view controller. I'll call it home view controller and I'll press enter. Cool. And for my view did load, I'll just say home view controller so I know which one gets called. Home view controller, home view controller, home view controller, home view controller. Great. Run the app again. Cool, so now that makes more sense in our console what's happening. So this is the home view controller methods getting called. I segue over to my controls view controller. And here we're seeing that CVC view will appear got called, which makes sense. Home view controller view did disappear, actually got called after my view came on screen. So it took a while there for it to get off memory. Cool. Let's go build some UI. So let's go to our storyboard. Let's go to our storyboard and build some controls, because part of the lesson also is about controls.
Wait, how do you do it to determine? Oh, okay, you put the agency in front of it.
Yeah, make sure it's in the view control, in the home view controller. All right, let's drag some controls. So let's go to the object library. Let's get a label. Drag a label over to our controls view controller. I'm going to position it. I'm going to use the guidelines here to help me. I'll position it right to the left margin and to right below the bar, the navigation bar. So that's my label. I'll call this label "This switch is on." Right? I'll drag in a switch. So UI switch. I'll drag in a switch. I'll keep it centered on my label with the blue guidelines. And I'll also try to keep the switch to the trailing edge of the margin here. So right about here. Like it's centered vertically with my label. Everybody? Right? Let's set the constraints for that. I will let everybody come put their UI elements on first. Has everybody dragged a label and a switch? Yes, sir.
Once I change the name of home view controller, did not see file there.
You what?
Once I change the name from view controller to home view controller, file it says get from.
Did you rename and refactor? Close Xcode and reopen. Anybody else got issues with the rename refactor? You rename and refactor, right?
Yeah, and like my view controller changed to basically like
But the name is still there. The home view controller is there, right?
yeah, but all my code that I have written out for
You refactor rename, you clicked on view controller.
none of my code for my view controller.
No, but not right here.
That's not what I have.
Was it only Kelby that had that view control issue? Okay, I'll slack out what I have because that's going to be faster for us to see where we could get here. Desktop, this one, compress. Desktop, this, no, this. Okay, I selected out, so that should get you up and running with where we are. All right, cool. So let's set up the constraints while Kelby is getting his zip unzipped. Let's set up the constraints. So click on your label. Click on the label. Let's set the constraints for the label first. Go to the Add New Constraints button, and we'll use pins. So we'll pin it to, we'll keep it at 20. Does the leading is the number 20? Okay, so click on that I-beam and keep it at 20. Let me zoom in so we see what's going on. So the I-beam says 20, correct? For the top, you could pin it at 0. Only working on the button, the label right now. On the label right now. We have 20 and we have 0. So 0 to the top and 20 to the leading edge. All right, cool. So add 2 constraints. Let's go back. So we have 2 constraints here. Now your label move a little bit. Drag down your switch so it's still centered. Somewhat. Right? So drag your switch such that it's to the trailing edge and it's centered of the label. Yes? I only made leading and top for the label. So the leading was 20 and the top was 0. All right? Only 2 constraints so far. Let's go ahead and constrain the switch. So for the switch, click on your switch and go to Add New Constraints. For the switch, we want it to be trailing 20. Trailing 20, and that top number there, actually just trailing. Trailing 20, 1 constraint. 1 constraint only. So far so good? And click on Add 1 constraint. We'll control drag from the switch, or better yet, control drag from the switch to make it center. So control drag from the switch over to our label, and we want it to be center vertical. So we want the switch and the label to be centered together, okay? So make sure on your switch, you click on center vertically. All right. At this point, we're pretty much done here because we have no errors. Oh, we have one warning. What's the one in here? Trailing. Okay. We need a trailing for the particular. We'll add a trailing for the label because we still have a warning. So click on your label and we'll add a trailing for it. So click on your label. Click on your label. Go back to Add New Constraints. And for trailing, you might have like 100 or whatever it is, right? Change that to 8. Change that number to 8. Let me zoom in so you see. Change that number to 8. So on the label, the trailing value is 8 points from the switch. And press Add 1 constraint. Right? At this point, we should have no warnings now. We did a bunch of steps here. But basically, our label is constrained to the leading edge, 20, the top edge, 0. Right? We stopped there. We went over to our switch. We said our switch, the trailing is 20, and it's centered vertically off the label. And the last step we said, our label trailing is 8 from the switch. Everybody? Are we all blue? We all good? Yes, question.
How come it's not requiring
It is, to the top and the edge. It's always relative to something. It's relative to the super view, the top and the lead-in. And after that, the switch is relative to the view, trailing, and the center of the label. Cool? All right, so here we have our switch. It's good. 12:55 already. All right, let's keep going here. We'll drag in a next label. So I'm going to get a next label from my library. And I'm going to get a stepper as well. So in the library, search for stepper, S-T-E-P-P-E-R, a stepper. I'm going to drag a stepper. I'm going to make it align right at the edge here, right at my trailing edge and center of my label. For my label, I will edit it and I will say looking at 6.0 cohort. Cohort. Cool? All right, let's actually set up the switch first. So for the switch, I will use the blue guidelines, the padding that Apple recommends here, and I'll use the trailing blue guideline. And we'll set the stepper first. So we'll set the constraints for the stepper first, okay? We'll center it afterwards. So click on the stepper, and let's go to add new constraints. We'll keep it 20. 20, correct? And for the top, so the stepper's top will be constrained to the bottom of the switch. The default here is 16 points. Do we see 16? One second. So let me take that out of the way a little bit. Stepper here. So I'm going to take my stepper. I'm going to drag it up right here. What number is this? I'll use my add constraints. What do you guys got? 8? 8 should be the default. It should not be 3. The minimum is 8. So you probably passed the blue guidelines. We could edit that later. We could edit that. Let's edit that together. So let's set that up and we'll edit it. Yeah, exactly. So we'll set the constraint first and we'll manually put 8. So go ahead and set your strut or your I-beam. So the top of my stepper, I will click on the constraint for the top. And it's 8 for me. Let's all make it 8. For the trailing, I'll select trailing, and the value is 20. Right, everybody? And I will click on Add to Constraints. All right, cool. And I will pick up my label here, and I'll center it with my stepper, like that. And I need constraints for my label. So my label, I'll constrain my label such that it's centered vertically of the stepper. I'll set the constraint on the lead-in such that it's 20. Let's go ahead and do that. So here, firstly, I will use my add new constraints. So make sure that your label is selected. I'll click on add new constraints. I'll select the lead-in to be 20. Lead-in is 20. I won't do 19 here, that's not what I want. So only lead-in is 20, and I'll click on add one constraint. right? I will control drag from my label over to my stepper. I will select center vertically. I'll select center vertically. Right? We still have one warning here. Let's zoom in here. Okay. We'll add a trailing on our label, because right now it doesn't have a trailing. We'll add a trailing on our label. So I will go to add new constraints, select on the label, go to add new constraints. I'll select on my trailing I-beam. Let me zoom back up here. So I'll select my trailing I-beam. I'll change 114 to 8. I'll add one constraint. Right? At this point, we should be properly constrained. We shouldn't have any other warnings. How you doing, Greg? Good? Chelsea? 8 is a good default value recommended by Apple. So 8 is the space between the label, if it's longer, and the stepper. So there's going to be a gap there, a padding. So the 8 says the trailing of the label is 8 points from the stepper's leading edge. Cool? Very good. All right, great. 1 o'clock. All right, cool. Let's see how that looks as we go. Let's see how that looks on an iPhone 4. Still looks good, right? Man, the iPhone 4 is small. How do we fit so much stuff on this? Cool. So our iPhone 4 is still good. Let's see what iPad looks like. Can't even see iPad. iPad looks good, as iPad is, right? So laid out the same. Let's go back to our iPhone Pro Max. And this is a good place to stop. We'll continue after lunch with part 2 of this, right? And get more used to, get more practice with auto layout. But we'll lay out our views. After lunch, we'll lay out a segmented control, an image view, a slider, and a label. So after lunch, this is what we'll do. And then we'll set them up with our view controller and go from there. Question, Amini?
Yeah, says when I change the it says when my label center and
We'll take a look at it. If no more questions, we'll stop here and we'll continue after lunch.